Well, hello. Today we're going to have a look at the first part of this unit. The unit's all about competitive advantage and business process improvement, which leads us into something called enterprise systems. So to get started, we're going to have a look at the first little bit of that. In particular, we want to look at competitive advantage and talk about that again. I know we've talked about it before, but we'll look at that again now that we know a little bit more. And we're also going to look at business functions. That'll include business processes, right, which we've also talked about before, but again, we'll revisit that in a little more depth, and functional systems. All right, so the history behind that and where that's gone. So let's get started. Well, we know that we've got systems everywhere. Organizations are full of systems. It's hard to think about a company or an organization these days that doesn't have a system somewhere. Right? Now, rather than just call everything systems, if we could break them down into different types and what they do, that might be helpful, right? That we can focus in a little more depth and a little more detail on what we're doing. And we've looked at that a little bit in the past as well. We're going to break them down a slightly different way today to think about that. But we need to do that because that helps us not only think about the systems, but also how they relate to each other, how they work together. All right? And I think you can imagine the amount of integration between systems is going to have a big impact on our organizations and in particular on competitive advantage. No different than manually. If we couldn't talk to, between the accounting department and in the HR department, that might really kind of hinder the work we do. But if we had good communication flows between those two departments, that could help a lot. Well, the systems that work in those departments, if they can communicate as well between each other, that could also help, couldn't it? So just a reminder, there were a couple ways we talked about for achieving competitive advantage. The first way is we can create something new or at least really enhance an existing product or service, right? Using technology to do something we haven't done before. Zipcar is given as an example in our text. They're a car share service, right, that you may have heard of. And they're totally web-based. They use card reader technology and things like that. So they've used technology in a way to come up with a competitive advantage over other companies. Totally different, right? Something new. The second way we can improve or find a competitive advantage is to make the company more efficient or more effective. Maybe that helps us lock in customers or lower our costs of doing business. Maybe it helps create barriers to entry for other companies. And an example talked about in our textbook is Grand & Toy. They're an office supply company, but they've gone beyond the basics now by offering more services, right? So they've done new things to help lock in customers and make them a company that's hard to duplicate. So it's hard for new entrants to come into that business now because Grand & Toy has got such a lock on things. And they've also used it to reduce costs internally. So they've done a lot of things with their technology, but they were already a business before. They were an office supply chain before. They've just used technology to improve things. All right, so a couple different ways. You can probably think of lots of other examples as well. I'd also encourage you just to go in and check both of these. You'll see in the material this week, I've got the links for you there. You can go check out those two companies and see what you think about what they've done. Let's have a look at another model now that we've mentioned briefly in the past when we talked about Porter's 5 forces, and that's Porter's value chain. Right? It talks about how as we move from left to right along the bottom, we've got different functional areas in an organization or different business functions that add value, right, to the products or the services we create, going from inbound logistics, bringing in whatever it is we need, to creating things, to moving it out and supporting our customers, and marketing and sales as well. We could modify those wording along the bottom to meet, whatever any particular organization does. For example, at the college, inbound logistics, that might be just bringing on faculty and other people. Operations would be teaching, right? Service and support, and marketing and sales, Maybe we're getting into things like alumni relations and recruitment and retention and things like that, right? So we could modify those, but that's kind of a good generic one. We've got all these operational things going along, or functional things along the bottom. Along the top, we've got sort of some generic support activities you might see in an organization, like HR or accounting or things like that. If we think about the different systems that might be in place, right, we can have a few examples here in marketing, product management, so design and development of products. Sales, we can look at lead tracking, sales forecasting, customer management, that sort of thing. Over in operations, there's all kinds of things going on there: order entry, inventory management, scheduling, production, systems like that might help out there. So we've got different software running there. If we look up top at some of the support activities, accounting, there's things there. You might have used some of these already in some of your courses or in your co-ops, where you're using accounts receivable or accounts payable software, budgeting software, even the general ledger or cash management, things like that. Lots of good systems there, been around for a long time. And in HR, there's a bunch of good things too that we could think about in terms of software or systems: compensation systems, performance appraisal, HR planning. And in fact, HR has been one of the more exciting areas over the last 10 years for developing, professionally. They're doing a much bigger job now, a much bigger role in organizations, because so many organizations depend upon having professionals and doing intellectual work. So it's very important to find good people and to keep them, right? So HR is kind of an exciting field. So we've got all these things going on, all these bits of software across an organization. And if we do a good job with it, maybe we can reduce costs a little bit, or do something that'll make our product more valuable, and that'll increase our margin, won't it? Okay, so that's the idea. Now, systems can help by making both those primary and support activities more productive than those of the competitors. So that's the idea, right, that we just talked about. Now, that's all dealing with being effective, doing the right thing, and being efficient, doing things correctly, right? Okay, that's true for any organization, not just for-profit companies, but something like Camosun College as well, right? So that's the key thing, right? Now, if we want to improve productivity, right, one of the things that could help would be if those systems could communicate with each other too. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about that as we keep going. Now, business processes, every organization has them, right? But we might not want to just automate our existing functions. Maybe we could get some benefit by thinking from a wider perspective. Think about the organization as a whole. Is there an opportunity to change some of those processes, or perhaps adopt some industry standard processes and bring them into our organization to do an even better job? And we do see that software kind of pushes that a little bit, doesn't it? Because if you go buy a commercial accounting package, you're probably going to have to change how you do your accounting to meet how the software works. So you're bringing in standardized processes automatically when you buy some of the software. Now, you could build your own software for everything and have your own way of doing accounting, but chances are, if you buy software from one of the big companies that's done software for thousands and thousands of companies for many years, you might be buying a better way of doing it when you buy their software, right? So our goal is always to have more efficient business processes, and we want to integrate all the activities from all the departments in that value chain, right, that we talk about. Okay. Now, looking at our processes is difficult, right? Process design projects are expensive. They're hard to do, right? Because if we think about business processes, right, we know that they can be complex. You've already drawn a few simple ones, and even a simple idea can get complex, can't it? We also have to get agreement between many different people on exactly how the process works. That can be a little bit challenging. Now, in the exercises I've given you in the past, I've just given you a written narrative, and we've just sort of trusted that's correct. In real life, we would sit down with people from different departments and we'd talk about the process of paying employees and exactly what happens, or the process of hiring new people and exactly how that should work. Sometimes getting agreement on those things can be a little bit challenging, can't it? Right? Okay. So that's an issue. It can also take a lot of time. It takes time, doesn't it, to go through, articulate the processes, and figure everything out, especially when you're dealing with a complex process. Imagine the process at the college for deciding upon introducing a new course into a degree program and maybe taking one out. That's a pretty complicated process. It has to go to lots of different people and up to senior people and committees and finally approval from the Board of Governors. That takes time, right? That can be a difficult thing to do. Something else that we may find happening is employees can foul things up because employees might resist change. Let's imagine I go talk to someone who's been working in the company for 20 years, doing accounts payable the way they've always done it. And I say, look, we're bringing in some new software and you're going to have to change how you do your job to match the new software. That kind of conversation happens all the time, doesn't it? And people can be a little resistant to that, especially if they're older, they've been around a long time, and they're set in their ways. You know, you might get someone who's brand new, kind of excited about the opportunity, but someone who's only got a year until retirement, they may be less excited, right? So employees can resist change. And you think about our 5-component model we talked about: hardware, software, data, procedures, and people. People are a pretty important part of that, aren't they? Right? And so we got to take that into consideration. The other thing, of course, is that these kind of projects can be very expensive, can't they? So if I'm going to involve a whole pile of people from the organization working together in committees, imagine the time. You know, if I want to bring a bunch of senior people together that get paid a lot of money per hour, it's going to cost, right? It's going to cost money in many different ways. And the outcomes aren't guaranteed, are they? Outcomes not certain. So even if we go ahead and we look at a way of redesigning a degree program, we may find in the end that it's not very good. We don't like it. It's not going to work, or that students don't like it. So the outcomes are not certain. We have to think about that too. So lots of challenges to the whole idea of even changing our business processes, even if we think we see some opportunities. Right? Now, the degree of change has an impact as well. So if we simply automate what we're already doing, we consider that to be a low-risk activity, and it will give us a bit of gain or a bit of return, but not a lot, right? So there is some return there, but you know, it's kind of low on both sides. The next level up would be something we call rationalization, right? There, the return can be bigger, right? So we don't just automate what we're doing, but we try to streamline it a little bit, right? Maybe cut out a step or two here, use technology to help a little bit. So the risk is going to go up then, isn't there? Because we may misunderstand something, that sort of thing. But maybe we can get a little bit more result. If we go a step further, we say, I want to really redesign my business process. Well, the return there can be pretty high, can't it? So if I change the way we hire and bring new faculty on at the college to something I think is going to be better and guarantee we get great faculty, well, that could give us a good return, couldn't it? But there will be some risk as well, won't there? That things go wrong, right? So that's a challenge. You know, so again, as we move out, we see risk and return kind of go hand in hand. The last one here in green, paradigm shift. You may have heard that term before, and for a while it was sort of the big tech or business buzzword. Oh, we got to have a paradigm shift. Paradigm is how we think about things. So a paradigm shift is let's change how we think about everything, right? That idea. Now that's going to radically rethink the organization. That might be changing from having music sold on CDs to having it sold as a streaming service. It worked out well for iTunes and Apple, didn't it? But that was a big risk that they'd invest all that money and then no one would want to do it, right? So big risk, but big return too. It's done very well for them. Think about Amazon. Let's change how people shop. Instead of going to the mall or to a store, we'll let them sit at their computer and shop. That's a big shift in thinking. Big risk, but big return as well, right? So that's the idea, right? So the further we go out here, the more risk, but the more return we could get. So there are degrees of change that we're talking about. Right? Now, typically a process redesign will look a little bit like this, right? We'll identify the process that we want to change, and we'll do a good analysis of it, and that might involve bringing other people in, right? So we're going to, meet with others, maybe lots of different people, and kind of talk about that and think about it. And then with those people, we'll go ahead and design a new process, right? And that might be a little change or a big change like we talked about just a minute ago. Once we've got it though, we're not done, are we? We're going to implement it. Of course, we're going to make the change, and that could be where we get some resistance from some employees or things like that. But we'll put it in place, and then we're still not done. A lot of people think we're done at that point, but it makes sense that we should actually look at what we've done and monitor for a while, measure the results and see if they were any good, right? And if we kind of have sort of ongoing measurement of the results, we may find at some point that it's time to do a new redesign, right? And so we may end up over time having a bit of a cycle back again. All right, so that might be a typical one. We could, you see, if you read about process redesign, they might label these differently, but that's the idea, right? We want to sort of work our way through, implement it, check to see if it's working. And if it's not, or if over time circumstances have changed, we may go back and do it again. All right, so that's our business redesign process. Let's look at an example one. This is a book ordering process, right? And it's got sort of two swim lanes, the customer and the clerk in the store. Right, so if we go to the very top here on the left, the customer goes to the bookstore, looks on the shelves to see if the book is available. If it is, they buy the book and take it home. They're done. That was easy. But what if it's not available? Well, then they can go to the clerk. So now we've moved down. The clerk searches. Did they find the book? If they did, then they give it to the customer. The customer is back to purchasing the book and going home again. If not, then they ask if they're able to order it, if the customer wants to, and are they able to order it? If they're not, we go up top and the customer leaves and goes to another store. But if they are able to order it, we continue on, and we've wrapped it around here a little bit just to fit it all on the screen. So follow with me. Sort of wrap around here, right? And what happens next? Well, the clerk, we come in at this point, the clerk places the order. The book is received by the store. The customer is notified. Then the customer has to come back to the store, buy the book, and take the book home. So we're into these two again, right? We just repeated them here to keep it a little tidy. This, if I stretch it all out, this is what I mean. It looks like this, right? It's one long process. Customer on the top, clerk on the bottom. All right. So that's fine, and that's how it often works. If I go into Bolin Books, for example, and I just search the shelves, I don't find what I want. I may end up in a process much like this, and they're very good. They'll order the book for me and call me when it's in, and I'll go pick it up. So that's okay. Can I use technology, though, to improve this? Sure, we could think about that, right? If we've got some good systems that people can access, maybe. So maybe I can access an online bookstore and search the catalog online. Even Bolin Books has that, right? That feature. And certainly something like Amazon, very good at that. I can see right away, is the book available? If it is, I just type in my order and payment data, and the book shows up in the mail, maybe next day shipping if I've got Prime, right? If it's not available, I'll just go to another online bookstore. Okay, Amazon doesn't carry it. Maybe it's a specialty thing. I'll go to a different bookstore, right? So that's fine. Look how much simpler that process is compared to the one we had just a minute ago. I've cut out many, many steps by redesigning this process. Right? So that's the idea that we can do if we redesign processes. Technology helped, right? Without technology, we couldn't do this, could we? Right? Now, can you start to get an idea of why Amazon suddenly became so successful? Their process was much simpler, not just for people, but also for their organization. And that's going to reduce their costs and enhance their profits, isn't it? All right, let's have a look at this idea of functional systems now, because that's all tied in, right, to what we're doing here. We've got different functional areas in an organization, like we talked about. Sales and marketing, operations, HR, and accounting might be some good generic categories, right? Now, if I have some software running in each of these systems, maybe I've got a piece of software in sales and marketing, and I have some software over in accounting, well, if those systems don't have a direct link between them, and that's what we often found in technology in the past, because accounting would buy some software, sales and marketing people would buy some software, maybe they even had different systems. One used PCs and one used Macs. Well, there's no way for those two bits of software to communicate, so we relied upon a manager in the middle to do the communication, right? Okay. So the manager was actually the nexus of communication. And believe it or not, when I went to business school, this is going back several years now, and we started talking about management in one of my classes. That's exactly how the instructor at the time, my prof, who was a great guy, introduced the whole subject. He said, look, one of the key roles of managers is to act as a nexus or a hub for communication, because that's the way it was back then, right? So each group did their own thing, and the manager brought all that together. All right. So we call these functional silos because they operate independently. You know, and the silo is like a grain silo you might see in the prairies, individual towers, but they're not connected, right? Okay, so the integration happens manually. We still have that to some degree today. There's no integration, for example, between D2L and the D2L gradebook and ChemLink. That's a manual process where the instructor has to move data from one to another. And you might be saying, well, why don't we just buy the software that'll fix that? Well, there's an opportunity, right? You've already started in your head on a business process redesign project, right? So functional systems are great, but they're limited because in reality, business functions are interrelated, right? What we do in one function is going to influence another function. Decisions are rarely appropriate for only a single business unit, right? We want to take more of an overall view of our company because otherwise we run the risk that we could implement something that actually negatively impacts another part of the organization. And that might be counterproductive in the end, wouldn't it? So we want to have sort of a better approach, right? So that led us to thinking about creating cross-functional systems that integrated more than one group. But like I said earlier, integrating different business groups gets even harder because every group has its own culture, doesn't it? And maybe different groups don't trust each other. Maybe they have different budgets and there gets to be arguments about who's going to pay for this, things like that, right? And then if we go beyond different groups within our own organization, imagine dealing with other companies as well, maybe our suppliers or something. And it becomes even harder to connect and communicate. Right? So what we see now is sometimes we're able to be successful at that, sometimes we're not. And so a lot of companies have a mixture. But good news, more and more we're moving towards good integrated systems, right? So we've been able to integrate our systems pretty well, and we're getting better all the time at it because the benefits are just so nice, right? So we are getting better. So functional systems are a great benefit, but they're limited because they operate in isolation. So we get data duplication, right? Maybe a lack of security around our data. Business processes are disjointed and cumbersome. Limited information is available at any time, so we're slow to make decisions. Right? We can have bad decisions based on limited knowledge, and that's all expensive, right? So That's the kind of thing we want to avoid, and that's what hopefully integrated systems will fix. And so starting maybe about, oh, I would say 20 years ago, companies started to say, let's see if we can integrate these. So we've got these functional systems here. Let's write a little bit of software for each of them that will allow them to connect with a server. We'll call that the Enterprise Application Integration Server. Right? So a computer system somewhere that will allow them to share data back and forth. That was some of the first work I did when I got hired in an organization from graduating, right? Was to write some of this software. So we're going back about 20 years or so. We want to integrate things for the different units. And that worked pretty well. But again, it's sort of a patch on top, isn't it? It's not a comprehensive solution. It's just taking what we already have, sticking some interpreters in the middle so they can all talk. We sort of automated the manager role in a sense, right? So that was a big gain though, right? And we got some good results from that. But then we started to say, look, wouldn't it be better if we just had one single centralized system? And then the different business functions could access that system? That would be great because then we'd have one repository of data that was safe and secure, and we could all share that data much quicker than ever before. Right? Everything's written in a standardized, consistent approach, all kinds of good things like that. That's something called Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP. All right? So one central database combined with a set of standard processes built on top of that database to make sure we've got great integration. So that's finally getting into a proper solution. All right. So rather than sort of the patching version I have up top here with enterprise application integration, we eventually started to move into just doing it from the ground up the right way. Okay. So that's it for now for this video. I want to give you a chance to take a break and explore this a little bit more. So read through the material, and I've also got some extra videos posted on the website you can look at if you want as well. And then in my next video, I'm going to have a more in-depth look at these enterprise systems and the various types of systems we'll see in that group.